I didn't intend to create a video this long, but that's kind of how it ended up. Basically, I have this program. It's called Salesforce Resume Revamp. And this program is geared towards Salesforce professionals who want to create a winning resume. A resume that's going to stand out against the competition and convert into interviews for the positions that they want. In the program, I'm covering the mistakes that people make that cost them the interview and that cost them money. I'm going to show my students the actual resumes for Salesforce positions that get interviews and offers on a consistent basis. I show resume transformations from how they look like before to what they look like now. I show how to get his resume in front of a hiring manager, and then once he gets his resume in front of the hiring manager, how is he going to make sure that he puts his best foot forward in the interview and knock it out of the park. I also am having conversations with hiring managers that I know in the ecosystem, and I'm getting their honest takes on what they actually look for in Salesforce positions. So you're not only going to hear from me, but you're going to hear from other people. And then I talk about like positioning and how you want to position yourself on your resume to appeal to the hiring manager and recruiter who are reading that piece of paper. That one page of paper helps either decides to get your foot in the door or it doesn't convert into an interview. So this is kind of what I'm working on right now. I'm working on this program. Have students in the beta program right now. And if you're interested, I forgot. If you're interested and you want to sign up for this program, all you have to do is go to somemagicnuggets.com/Salesforce-resume-revamp. That's all you got to do. I'll say it again, somemagicnuggets.com/Salesforce-resume-revamp. And there you're going to find all the information you need, and you can make the decision if you want to sign up today. Anyway, that's the backstory. So I'm working on this program, right? And I have a student that asked me some questions about things that he thinks would be beneficial to add to the program, an expansion of it, basically. So there are a few themes that he would like for me to touch on, which is hurdles that he would potentially face. So you'd face experience in training hurdles. He'd figure out, or the next hurdle would be how to get his resume in front of a hiring manager. And then once he gets his resume in front of the hiring manager, how is he going to make sure that he puts his best foot forward in the interview and knock it out of the park? So he was thinking, could I add an interview format to the program? And I'm considering it. It's talking about technical questions, like how would I cover technical questions? How would I cover non-technical questions? How would I talk about red flags and problems that interviewees unwittingly do in interviews that signal to hiring managers that they shouldn't continue with the interview? And then another component is salary negotiation. How do you actually do that? So I kind of briefly touch on these topics in the video, and I thought it would be worthwhile to share it with everybody else. So that's why I'm releasing it as a video. Now I'm going to shut up in this intro, and I'm just going to let me earlier in the day do the talking. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I wanted to talk about my response to your message. So you asked about, there are a few hurdles that you could potentially foresee. Now, the first one you mentioned is experience in training. The second is getting the resume in front of the hiring manager. And then logically, the third step from there is what to do in the interview. And so you said that you have no concerns with talking to somebody and demonstrating your knowledge, and you have the experience to effectively back that up. But the nuance there is that they're conducted with your peers, and there's substantial help along the way, some sort of interview prep and support. And that doesn't really transfer to job interviews for Salesforce positions. There may not be these support systems or helps, or yes, there might not be these support systems that help Salesforce professionals trudge along their journey to landing these Salesforce positions. So I think, to your point, one of the things that you highlighted, or one of the things that you were wondering about, is would there be some sort of interview format? Like, what kind of advice could I provide, or insights I could provide based on the interviews I've been in and have done to help Salesforce professionals increase their chances of getting higher paying jobs, and jobs that they love, of course. You said you'd be interested in examples about technical questions that get asked, the breakdown of technical versus non-technical questions, and kind of the faux pas and red flags that you see interviewees do, or the red flags that interviewees give that would lead the interviewer or hiring manager to go ahead and stop the interview right then and there, or to just not proceed with the candidate. And then you also talked about the second part of this interview help component would be helping with salary negotiation. So some people have never had to negotiate their salary, and some people might not be sure about how that process works. And even if people are familiar with the process, just kind of at a high level how it works, they don't really know what to say to help bolster their case for getting the Salesforce job that they want, or like to help effectively get paid more. And so your question is, if I could provide some insight from the hiring manager side on, what the expectations are, what to anticipate during the salary negotiation process. How many back and forths are too many? What do you say in an interview? What are the things that we can signal throughout the interview process that can lead the recruiter or hiring manager know that we hold ourselves in high regard and that we're a high value person, and that we're not going to take a low salary number for any Salesforce position? And so you'd effectively like a little more information about the process so you don't shortchange yourself. And I think this is totally fair. So what I'm going to do is briefly talk a little bit about the kinds of things that I'm proposing of adding. And I'm curious from your perspective if this is something that would be valuable to you. So let's start with one idea. So I've toyed around with the idea of creating a community around Salesforce professionals, whether they're going through interviews, whether they're negotiating their salary, whether they're on the job and they need help with trying to solve one particular problem or issue, or they just need a support system. I've thought about creating and fostering a sense of community, and I'm curious if you would potentially be interested in joining that if I offer that. But moving on to the interview format. So what kinds of technical questions get asked? So I know that I have I think it's about 16 pages of Salesforce interview questions that you can get when you subscribe to the newsletter. I'd be curious from your perspective. Go and download that. You should have probably gotten that in your welcome email. There's a link there that has 16 plus pages of Salesforce interview questions. It has technical questions, cultural questions, and technical questions from a developer and administrator perspective, cultural questions, behavioral questions. And these are questions that I get asked in interviews. So I know that it would be helpful to provide those types of questions to you. And there are things, they can range from tell me about yourself, and start very basic. Tell me about yourself to, hey, could you tell me what the difference between a workflow rule and a flow is? Could you give me an example of a time you've built a flow and an error message you've gotten? What is the most complex flow error message you've gotten? Can you tell me what advanced currency is? Could you tell me how to create, a a dynamic report or dashboard? Could you tell me the differences between Lightning and Classic? Could you tell me what some of the feature gaps are in Lightning versus Classic? What is something that you do in Classic that you wouldn't do in Lightning? Could you tell me about, sharing rules? What does private mean versus public read? What does private versus public read write mean? Could you tell me about, permission sets and times and weird errors that you've gotten when? And I'm speaking from an administrator perspective, but these are just questions that I would ask. If you put something like CPQ, I would ask a CPQ question. What is a quote term? What is a quote template? What are some of the problems and pains that you face while working on these things? Could you write me a formula to do X, Y, and Z? If I wanted to, put, or what kind of limitations do you run into when you're creating formula fields? What is a compile size limit? What is a text limit? What is your best practice when creating that new field? How do you determine what is your litmus test for determining whether or not you want to create a field? What is your litmus test for deciding whether or not you wanted to create a workflow rule over a flow? Or deciding when deciding when the scope of the work request that's coming in is outside the realm of the Salesforce administrator. When does it go to the Salesforce developer? Having these types of discussions. Or something could theoretically be a flow, but you don't have the time or bandwidth to focus on writing it. So you will kick it off to the developer, and the developer will go ahead and write it. So like, what is a calculus that you put in what is a decision calculus that goes in your brain when you figure out when something should be a development task versus when it should be an administrative task? And even if it should be an administrative task, when do you find the desire to kick that off to development? And then you'll hear there's interview questions like, so let's talk about more cultural, like red flags to me when I hear managers say like work hard, play hard. Well, I wouldn't say it's a red flag. I would say that if you're looking for that, if you're specifically targeting these fast-paced environments where you're going to get a significant amount of work experience in a condensed period of time, the work hard, play hard is kind of like that signal to you that it's not a 9-to-5 job. And some people want that and some people hate that. So that's a signal to me. A culture, one definite cultural interview question that I've heard before is, and this is actually illegal, but earlier on when I've interviewed with early stage companies, they'll kind of just plainly ask you straight up if you have a family or if you have children or if you intend to have children. Those are not questions that I would like to get. And I think in the off chance that you do get them, you should have a prepared answer. But if you're trying to target more large established companies, you're likely not going to get that. Let's see what else. Let's talk about the breakdown of technical versus non-technical discussions. So I kind of touched on like the technical interview questions I would get or ask for Salesforce interview positions. But the non-technical discussion is more along the lines of, or here's an example. This is the kind of question that I'd ask to bridge the gap between a technical and non-technical line of questioning. Tell me about the most challenging Salesforce task that you've done or integration that you've built. And from there, I'll get their surface level answer. And then I'll spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes just drilling down into what the answer is. So I'm having the candidate build me the universe of the problem that they've solved, why it was a problem, why it was a technical challenge, and then try to find out what the actual Salesforce or the actual solution that they built to solve the problem. What was the impact of it? But I'll try to go a few levels deep. So let's say someone says that they built an automation to, for the sake of an argument, like they built a schedule flow to send out emails at 12 p.m. every day to account executives who I don't know. Let's just say they send out a flow every day at midnight. And then I would ask, okay, could you tell me how you did that? Okay, so I wrote a scheduled flow. Okay, could you tell me what you did in the, and then I'd go a little bit deeper. I'd say, okay, could you tell me what you wrote in the get records query? Okay, could you tell me how you filtered, did you filter it at the top Did you filter at the top level flow? Yes or no? Okay, so you wrote get records. What was the filter criteria you used? Okay, perfect. Did you do a for loop on those records? Did you store all the records? Did you choose the default selection to store the records, or did you create your own custom advanced way of mapping fields? Okay, you store that in a variable. Okay, could you tell me what you did XYZ? So I would go increasingly more detailed. And my goal is to try and find the limits of their knowledge on the most technically difficult thing that they've solved. And the reason for this is because sometimes you'll get candidates who say that they did something difficult, but in reality, when you press them and you ask them more probing questions, you find that they actually didn't do it, or they just like wrote like one line. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to identify is how much did they actually do on the most technically challenging project that they said they did. And if they're able to answer it and we're able to go deep and have an honest discussion about what they did, then I think it's an excellent indicator that one, they have honesty, two, they have integrity, and three, they're technical. And any kind of deviation from these two things drastically reduces the chances that I would like to proceed with this candidate, because one, it shows that if they're lying to me, I'll be able to tell because they won't be able to answer in depth. And two, if they don't have that integrity, then I don't want to work with them. And three, it shows like, okay, this person worked on something technically challenging. We're doing something like this, or we're doing something similar, or we're doing nothing related to that. But I feel very confident and comfortable that in our conversation that they would be able to come and work on something with the proper support and enablement to help us, move our Salesforce feature enhancement delivery to the next level. So that's kind of how I'd be thinking about things. That was a technical discussion point. What about cultural? Actually, did I touch on this? I don't have any notes in front of me. I'm just looking at the message here. Let's see. Cultural interview questions, of course. So what I would do is, as a candidate, I would research the company values. I would know them. And a lot of companies say they have company values, and it's really just marketing. They don't actually hold these values. They say they do, but in reality, they might do something completely different. But nonetheless, I would still know them because certain companies actually do hold their values very close to them. And it's one of the rubrics that they might have in hiring for a candidate on like the cultural side. And then also knowing, this is a simple question, but like knowing why you actually want to work for the company. Why are you choosing to apply for the company? And it doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that you want to help them with their Salesforce org, right? And of course, like if you were to probe people, the honest answer is like they want to be paid more money. And this company is ultimately one of the companies that will help them get there. It also just so happens that they like the product space that they play in. They like the leadership team. They like the people who've invested in the company. They like the story. They like the history. They've worked with somebody there in the past and they've heard great things, or they've looked on Glassdoor and heard great things. And they think that, and you think that your skill sets could complement the Salesforce team very well and help them get to wherever they need to go in their business. That's a totally fair answer. And I just think it's important that you have that you answer that question, knowing why you want to work for a company. Of course, you're going to get the other questions like, tell me about a time you faced conflict. Tell me about a time where you've disagreed with somebody. And those two questions are kind of hand in hand. But you don't necessarily have to answer that question. If you're coming from a completely different industry, you can answer that question without the story having anything to do with Salesforce. Because ultimately they want to see how you handle conflict, how you handle escalations, and if you're level-headed about handling conflict, because there are people that you might work with and they're very intelligent and they know so much about the platform. They know how to tackle something in like 5 seconds and they have a plan forward and everyone feels good, but they are hot-headed and they do not know how to control their emotions or have no composure. And that adds a lot of undue stress on not only their individual team, but the teams that they work with. And so interviewers will want to make sure that, or they're going to be checking to see if, you keep your composure, generally speaking. Maybe some companies want to hire someone who is hot-headed. I don't know, but not, or they're willing to look past it in exchange for the knowledge that these people have. But as a candidate, you should be looking out for this. You can kind of get a sense of that in your interview, in the line of questions that the interviewer will ask you. You'll kind of have an intuition or a sense of, this person's asking me weird questions. I don't feel comfortable with these questions. Therefore, I'm not sure if I would feel comfortable working with them if I'm on the job. Because it's important to keep in mind that not only are they interviewing you, you're interviewing them, and you have every right to ask questions that you feel comfortable asking. Do not feel that just because they might have a higher title than you, or they might have been in the ecosystem longer, that you should feel inferior, because if you feel that way, then you're going to speak like you are inferior to them, and people might sense that, and they might not want that in their hire. Let's see what else. Faux pas and red flags. Okay, so here's a perfect example. I would not like to hire somebody if they. Okay, so I had an interview where I asked a candidate something. I remember bringing up that. How am I going to tell this story? So I brought up that I liked the product that the company was like. This person worked at a company, and I liked one of the products that the company was selling. So I said, I like that. And I said, oh, like I'm in my head, I was like, I'm curious. Or no, I said out loud, I'm curious who else is using it. Kind of like offhandedly. And then this person goes on to say, oh, let me tell you. Let me just go look it up right now and like find like people who purchased the product. And to me, that's when I felt like kind of the ground shake from under me, where I said to myself, I don't think you should be doing that. And they ended up giving me information, and I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel comfortable. It wasn't that I didn't feel comfortable hearing it. I didn't feel comfortable that this person went into their Salesforce environment, searched people's names and company names, and then told me that information. And that might have been totally okay for maybe their business is totally fine with doing that. But me personally, like if I'm working in an ecosystem, especially if I'm working in a regulated environment, and that person was on the team that I was working with, and they were interviewing somewhere else, and they just gave other people like private information, that would be kind of, we wouldn't want that, right? So that's something that stood out to me. And then I think on that note, it's generally not a good idea, even if you had a terrible experience working at a company, you had a terrible manager, or you had a terrible colleague or whatever, and they ask you like why you left the company. You can say like you had a disagreement over the vision of the company, you had a disagreement about how things were done there, but you do not want to start making ad hominem personal attacks on the people that you work with that you may not have necessarily had a great relationship with, because that's also not going to translate well in an interview. It's like people aren't going to want to bring someone on the team who is just constantly whining and complaining about something that went wrong in their previous role. So that's something that I would keep in mind. What else? And then there's more tactical things, like make sure that you have your webcams on and working, and you have a clear desk, and that you're dressed well, and you take a shower beforehand, and you have good lighting, and you make sure that your audio is good, and you're in a place where you can speak without any distractions, and you have your phone on silent and things like that, so you can be focused on the interview. And of course, there's other red flags, like you interview somebody and it's not who they say they are, or you interview somebody and yeah, it's not who they say they are. So you are interviewing someone and then you have a picture of them and it's someone completely different, or you interview somebody and they're lip syncing on the interview, meaning the candidate on the screen is just moving their mouth, but someone else is speaking. You don't want to do that. Like, those are obvious red flags. You don't want to proceed with interviewing them. In fact, you should just cut the interview off right then and there. What are other interview red flags? Nothing's coming to mind right now, but I'll think about it, and maybe as I'm talking through the next points, something might come up. There's another component to this, which is a salary negotiation. Some people have never had to negotiate and they're not sure how the process works. If I could provide some insight from my side about what's expected or anticipated during the salary negotiation process. So I think something that not a lot of people realize is that the negotiation process starts at the first call. And you're wondering, like, how does that happen? Well, let me break it down this way. I would think of the salary negotiation process as something that starts at the beginning, because it's this game where the candidate is signaling to the recruiter and the recruiter is signaling to the candidate, directly opposing messages. So the candidate's saying, the candidate's goal is to try and signal that their value should be, or like their pay should be commensurate with the value that they're providing. And the recruiter, hold on, cut. So there's this song and dance that the recruiter and hiring manager, that the candidate and the recruiter are playing. So the candidate's trying to signal that they should be paid the value that's commensurate with the experience that they provide. And the recruiter is trying to get the candidate potentially at the lowest rate that they possibly can. So what is the minimum amount of money that the candidate is willing to accept for the position and potentially try and get them there? Now, some recruiters generally don't do this, and they're actually there for the best interest of the candidate, but I personally don't operate under that assumption. I always operate under the assumption that the recruiter is trying to get me for the lowest possible rate, and my goal is to try and get myself for the highest possible rate or salary, total compensation number, etc. And I said that it starts at the negotiation process starts at the beginning, and here are some examples. So the recruiter might say something like this. Hey, could you tell me a little bit about what you're looking for? Like, what are you currently making now? And or what are you currently looking for in your next role from like a compensation perspective? And some people might tell right then and there. If you tell a number right then and there, the recruiter knows, okay, this person's not experienced in negotiating. So I can potentially get them for lower. What you should do is you should say something like this. Hey, listen, I haven't really thought much about it, but I'd be curious, did the hiring manager or anybody give you a salary range for this position? And they might give you a salary range. And in my mind, whenever I hear the salary range, I always add an additional delta on top of the top level number, because the range is just a range and that number is always flexible. So in my head, I go, okay, if I do very well in the interview, I could probably add an additional X percentage of money on top of the range and we can close the deal there. And I've done this before. So the idea that the range is locked in is not always necessarily true. So if I'm okay with the number, I'll be like, I'll say something like this, that's a good start. I think, I'm not worried about compensation right now. I'm just worried about making sure that, the position that I'm interviewing for is a good fit. Or like, I want to make sure that, we're a good fit for each other in the first place. So we can discuss compensation later, but I think that's a good starting point to talk about, to discuss. And what I'm alluding to is the range that they provided. If they don't provide a range, that's okay too. What you can do is you can do research on Glassdoor. And I would say Glassdoor would be a vague approximation of a salary number. There's also levels.fyi that I like to check for technology companies to kind of give me a good ballpark of what engineers are getting paid at the company. So let's say and people might have this fear that, well, what if they need a number? Like what if they tell me they can't proceed without a number? I will only say that in my entire years in the Salesforce industry, this has only happened to me once. I've only had this scenario happen to me once where the recruiter did not want to proceed because I did not give them a number. It's only happened once. I've gone through countless interviews. I've gone through countless interview negotiations, and this has only happened one time. And it was like it was like the first 6 months of my exposure to the Salesforce industry. So it happens rarely, but you know what? That's okay. If they don't want to proceed, the way I would see it is you dodged a bullet, and you should not work. You should feel good that you're not working for a company that's going to try and nickel and dime you every single time. So, okay, so I touched on how the negotiation process starts from the very first phone call. And when you say something like, hey, we can discuss compensation later. I just want to find out if we're a good fit for each other. What you're signaling to the recruiter is your experience and that this isn't your first rodeo. So the recruiter's gonna be like, okay, they know the game. Let's just get them through the interview process and we'll discuss compensation later. And that's fine. I think that's the first signal. The recruiter might also say some things like this. What are you looking for in your next role? What are you looking for in your next role? So this is kind of how I answer the question when I'm asked this. I'll say something like, I really value like autonomy and like my personal autonomy. So what I mean by that is I personally like being given like a vague business problem, and then ultimately it's on me to try and solve it. Personally, I like that lack of structure and trying to build some sort of structure around the solution and then delivering it to the stakeholders. I like that process. It's fun for me. So I want to make sure that I can do that there, meaning I don't want to work at an organization where everything is very rigidly defined and I feel like I'm just a cog in the machine. I don't thrive in those environments. I also don't want to work in an environment where I am micromanaged. I do not like being micromanaged. I like to make sure that I have the autonomy and ability to work on things that I think are going to drive value to the business. And then the third thing, of course, is I say this, and of course, I'm not a charity. I want to make sure that I'm paid commensurate with the value that I provide. So obviously compensation is a third component of the thing that I'm looking for in my next role. And the recruiter is like, oh shit, okay, this guy, there's a lot of things that I said there that I kind of want to break down. So first, I didn't lead with compensation. I ended with it. And then the first and second is I've given a lot of thought about what I value in a new role. And it's basically an extension of the things that I had in previous roles that I enjoyed. So I enjoyed autonomy. I enjoyed working with people that were excellent to work with, like very intelligent and great people to work with. I really enjoy that. And I've also been in scenarios where I've been in places that I did not enjoy the working environment. And those are places where the person was a micromanager. So I was very clear about that. I'm looking for a place that does not have this. I have the autonomy to do what I want to do and work on things that I think are going to drive value to the business. And then right then and there, the recruiter can determine if it would not be a good fit to proceed. And in almost all cases, it is a great fit. Because yeah, of course that makes sense. The candidate wants autonomy. They want to make sure that they're not being micromanaged and they want to make sure they're getting paid. That's fair. So that's usually what I would say in the process. And what it signals to the recruiter is that you're not playing around. You can make jokes on these recruitment calls, but ultimately when it comes down to like salary and like what you're able to provide, don't really joke about that. And then the interview process are these other signals. So how you perform in the interview, especially how you perform in the technical interview, is going to be the biggest driver of what you get on your salary or what you get on your total compensation. So you can do really well in the behavioral and cultural and all that stuff. But if you don't do well in the technical interview, then it's going to reduce you're likely going to get a number that's on the lower end of the range rather than on the higher end of the range if they extend an offer. If they don't extend an offer, then it doesn't matter if you did poorly if you did well on everything else, they're just not going to feel like it's a good fit. So it's very important to do well in the technical interview. Let's say you knock it out of the park in the interviews, right? And you feel like you're about to get an offer. This is usually what I see happens. The recruiter will send you an email or they'll try and give you a call and say, hey, I got great news. You got about 15 minutes to talk. I can call you at this time, etc. And so you're going to be expecting a phone call. This is the first song and dance that the recruiter is going to try and do to tease out that an offer is coming. So you'll get on the phone call And then they're going to say, hey, things look really well. We feel really good about extending an offer. What is a good number that you'd be willing to work with us on? And don't give them a number here. You say something like this: hey, listen, I'm excited about the interview. I'm excited to have gone through the interview process, and I'm excited to see, what offer is what y'all are going to provide. Let me know whenever y'all are ready to provide an offer, and then I'll be ready to discuss it. And then they might throw out numbers like, hey, does this sound like in a good ballpark? Does that sound in a good ballpark? If they throw out a number that's incredibly low, be very clear. Like, no, I absolutely cannot accept that number. Like you can say something like this, because this is what I say. Listen, I was making that like 4 or 5 years ago. There's no way I can take that. And then to them it signals, okay, we're way off base there. Let's go find out a number that does make a little more sense. And it's totally okay to have that conversation. Don't feel scared. If you feel scared, or actually, I'm not going to tell you to not feel scared. It's okay if you feel nervous or scared at the very beginning, because you haven't done it before. But once you do it enough times, it just kind of becomes normal and happenstance. And this is part of the negotiation process. So what they're doing is they don't want to give you a written offer right out the gate, because they want to suss out where they should be falling on the range that makes sense for you. But I wouldn't really give a number here. I would just say, listen, just give me something. Let me look it over and, speak with my family about it, and I'll get back to you. So they'll have that phone call. Then they'll go and then they're going to make you an official offer. Hey, we're excited to give you an offer. And they'll ask you to get on a phone call or on a Zoom. They'll ask you to they'll give you the offer. They'll tell you you're making X in compensation. You might get this bonus. You might get this stock, blah, blah, blah. Here, what we don't want to do, we do not want to start the negotiation process right out the gate. On the phone call or the Zoom call, what you want to do is just try and collect information. So you might try and collect information like, okay, perfect. This is excellent. Thank you so much you say something like this. Let's say we're excited to offer you, just for the sake of simplicity, $100,000 salary, a 50% yearly bonus, and $50,000 over 4 years for a junior Salesforce developer. Let's just say for the sake of argument. What I would say is the following, hey, I just want to say thank you for extending the offer. I'm super excited about the opportunity to work here. I just want to ask you a few questions, and my voice cracked there. I just want to ask you a few questions, and then I'll take a few days to make this decision and get with my family, and then I'll get back with you. And then you can ask a question like this. Hey, could you tell me, so I just want to confirm I'm coming in at a junior Salesforce developer, right? Yes, that's correct. Okay. Could you tell me about what the compensation range is for this Salesforce position, if you don't already know it? And could you tell me what the range for the salary for the mid-level Salesforce developer position is? And additionally, could you tell me what the the role and responsibilities of that mid-level Salesforce developer is? They might say something like, oh yeah, I don't have that off the bat, but let me get with the hiring manager and see if they have a job description, see if we can send that over to you. Excellent. Perfect. Yes, I'd love to send that over. Why am I asking this question? Because it's totally okay for you to push back on a title that you're getting offered. So if you feel like your experience is commensurate with the mid-level Salesforce developer and not the junior Salesforce developer, then you want to make sure that you have all the ammunition, for lack of a better term, to fight a battle that you think you're going to win. Like, if you feel like you have enough bullet points and experience to be able to be the mid-level Salesforce developer, well, you want to negotiate that now. You don't want to wait until you're at the job and it's too late. Like, you're leaving money on the table, right? So you want to ask that question. Another question is, if you're getting stock in a publicly traded company, you want to find out, what the vesting schedule is. Typically, the first 25% vests on the first year, and then every month after that, subsequently, there will be vesting, or it'll vest every 6 months after that. You kind of want to find that out. What's another thing I would ask? So you want to know what the salary range is for your current position. You want to know what the salary range for the one above it is. You want to know what the job description is for both positions and titles. These are good questions to ask. And you don't want to start negotiating, right? So you're going to go back and you will go ahead and retreat to a position of level-headedness and having time on your side. Give yourself maybe like 2 to 3 days. Tell them you'll get back to them in 2 to 3 days, but you could potentially get back to them later that night or later that day or in the next day. Now, how you negotiate personally is up to you. I like to do both. I've done both email and I've done over in person. I like to do in person because over the course of the negotiation process and in my interviews, it's not like I'm working to build rapport, but I built a relationship with these people. And so I feel like having an honest discussion on a Zoom call is likely how I help negotiate best. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that in person, then it's totally okay to do it over the phone or on email. And I have a script for this, which I can link to you. It's on my website, but ultimately it will lay out an email script that you can use to help negotiate your salary. And there's usually room for negotiation. There's almost always room for negotiation, whether you need more salary, whether you need a sign-on bonus, whether you need more stock, whether you want an accelerated vesting schedule, whether you wanted an acceleration promotion discussion, or more vacation time, or you're going to take a vacation within the first 2 weeks, so you want to make sure that they know that. There's a lot of things that you can negotiate here. There's a lot of things you can negotiate here. So you'll get back to them with your response or after a phone call. And of course, throughout this negotiation process, you do want to find a number that works for you, right? Like you should have a number. You should have a number that works for you, that if they give you this number, you will feel comfortable taking the job. You should also have a number that if they don't reach it, then you also feel comfortable walking away. I also wanted to touch on the walking away aspect. So the leverage the best way you can have a leverage in a negotiation here is to get other job offers. By far, the biggest lever that you can pull to get more money is to have other job offers. So you can communicate this or other interviews that are coming down the pipeline. And you can kind of pepper this in throughout your discussions with the recruiter. So you don't necessarily have to wait until the negotiation process to bring this up. You can say, hey, look, I'm in discussions with another company here, or I just started another discussion with another company, but I really want the opportunity to work with y'all. So I'm just letting you know this. And it shows that you're in demand. And it also shows that you're willing to work with them to come to a common goal, right? Like the philosophy that I try to think of is the recruiter and I are trying to work towards a common goal of getting me hired. We're working towards this goal of getting me hired. What is it going to take? How can we get there? We're both flexible. Let's see if we can work together. So rather than viewing the recruiter as this adversary, try to view them as this collaborator. Even though I mentioned earlier on, sometimes you want to view the recruiter as someone who is trying to get you for the lowest possible rate. Well, sometimes I like to flip that, and I try to view the recruiter as someone who's there in my best interest, trying to help me land a position. Work together. You could say things like, look, even if you're not nearly there, you could say things like this. Listen, I feel like we're right there. I feel like we're nearly there. All we need to do is figure out what to do with salary. We just need to figure out what we need to do with the bonus structure. We just need to figure out what we need to do with the hiring, with the sign-on bonus. But I feel like we can close the gap and find something that works for both of us. And you'd be surprised at how that works. I've gotten messages from recruiters that are like, listen, like we're able to get you this. Like it didn't come to your number, but it got me like 85, 90% of the way there. And I was happy with that. So additionally, when you're baking in your numbers to your recruiters, be sure to shoot higher for what you, higher than what you think. So let's say you're negotiating, let's say you get an offer at 100K and they counter and you say, I listen, like 100K, I can't do that. I'd love the opportunity to be able to get to, let's say your goal is to get to like 110, right? So you could say something like, based on the value and experience I've been able to provide at previous organizations, I think like 125 is an excellent a number that to be paid, and I think it reflects the value that I bring. and what I can definitely do at your company. And you know that you're probably not going to get 125, so you're actually looking at getting like 115. So like, yeah, we definitely can't do 125, but what we can do is we can do like 115. And then you got what you wanted, right? Versus if you say, listen, like 100K is way too low. I'm targeting 115, so I'm actually aspiring to be at 115. Well, they're not going to give you 115. They're going to give you like 107 or like 109 or something like that. So it's all about framing. And throughout the process, the recruiter will try to signal to you that, hey, listen, like it's not about the money. Like people join this company for the mission. Don't believe that. People, yes, maybe they might join it for the mission, but like they're doing it because they're joining a startup and they think that the company is going to go big. And so they actually took equity in the company. So they're willing to take a lower salary in exchange for like equity being worth way more than the salary would ever be like 5 to 7 years down the line. So, you know, people say like, oh, we don't do it. They're just trying to get you to take a lower salary, and don't play that game. So this is a long-winded way of kind of giving what my thoughts would be on these topics. I'm curious if this is kind of what you were looking for. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Just to plug again, I'm working on my program. It's called Salesforce Resume Revamp. It helps Salesforce professionals craft a winning resume to land them the job that they've always wanted. That's my goal. I'm taking all the knowledge that I've learned as being a Salesforce professional over the last almost a decade, and I'm distilling it into actionable information that you can do to transform your resume from looking bland to looking like an amazing resume that will convert into those interviews. So if you're interested, you can sign up at somemagicnuggets.com/Salesforce-resume-revamp. Again, somemagicnuggets.com/Salesforce-resume-revamp. Thanks for listening.